All right, everyone. Welcome back to the show. I'm happy to announce today I have Evrett Lunquist as my guest today. Evrett, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Can you, before we begin, can you give yourself an introduction on your background?
Well, sure. I am the Director of Certification at the Demeter Association, and we are the Biodynamic Certifier for agriculture and food processing in the United States. And a little bit more of my background before I started working at Demeter is that I've been operating a biodynamic certified farm for about the last 25 years. And have a range of produce and livestock, and have been selling to the local community in the Lincoln, Nebraska area. And I've also worked as an inspector for the Demeter Association and lots of organic certifiers around the country, starting in about 2001. Yeah, so I have a little history with farming, a little history with certification work, and now working for the Demeter Association for biodynamic certification.
Gotcha. Well, in this episode, I did want to talk extensively about biodynamic farming, and in particular, the process that goes into getting certified as a biodynamic farm through the Demeter certification process. I know in Western Europe, biodynamic farming is a lot more of a popular movement than it is in the US. So before we begin, can you give like kind of a good introduction to what biodynamic farming even is and how it differs from, let's just say, the extreme opposite, which would be like conventional farming or the factory farm model?
Right. Well, a little bit of history too with biodynamic is that it kind of originated in Europe, and from lectures given by Rudolf Steiner back in 1924. And the biodynamic method of farming didn't really come to the United States until quite a bit later. And so Europe's had a longer lead time in terms of how to for developing that in on the other side of the ocean. So looking for some of the differences between organic and biodynamic and conventional.
Yeah, I guess let's go ahead and begin with just kind of going over even what biodynamic farming is for people that aren't even aware of what that phrase. I've never even heard of that phrase before.
Right. A word that I've been hearing a lot lately is regenerative when you're talking about agriculture. And I would say that biodynamic is the original regenerative agriculture, going back all the way to 1924. One of the concepts that can be found in biodynamics is one of treating your farm as individuality, or sometimes people call it a farm organism. And the goal is to have a healthy farm organism in and of itself. So self-sustaining is the ideal. And that's one of the big differences between conventional agriculture and biodynamics, and even to a certain extent organic, where that has a lot of import materials brought into the farm. So the goal is always to have a self-regenerating agricultural system on a biodynamic operation, to minimize the number of inputs coming into the farm. How that's done comes with a number of different avenues. We have, I would say, like a number of principles that are brought into a biodynamic operation. And one of them is biological diversity, that a farm is not going to be a monocrop of one field or one crop. It's going to have lots of botanical diversity. It's going to have wildlife areas. There's going to be integration of livestock and use of green manures. There's going to be incorporation of compost into the system, and reducing tillage, And actually, part of the biodynamic standards is having a 10% of the farm that is devoted to just biological diversity. So you're having areas that are either planted into insectary plantings, wilderness areas, forests, marshes, flowering things that are going to encourage the insects, um, the beneficial insects of the farm, and other things generating fertility on the farm. Use of on-farm manures is important, and disease control and insect control is also you're going to try and have those things managed from within the farm itself. So say if you have an aphid problem on your farm, on your crops, then you should be doing things to encourage ladybugs, because they're predators of those aphids. So one of the few things that ladybugs need that people don't often think about, they need aphids to feed on, but they also need a pollen source and nectar sources for other stages of their life, and so that they can reproduce. And so as a farm, you want to try and have those things incorporated into the farm. And so it's a kind of a self-stabilizing operation. You think about a forest, that's kind of like your archetypical self-sustaining ecosystem. Animals moving through it, there's leaf litter falling to the ground, it gets decomposed, it gets brought back up into the canopy. You have this fertility system, you have a respiration system, you have an immunity system going on in that type of scenario. So those are some of the key differences between organic, biodynamic, and conventional agriculture.
Do you feel like when Homo sapiens first started kind of like cultivating crops or domesticating animals for food production, it was like a far more, initially when they first started doing it, it was a far more basically diversified farming system from the get-go. But the more modern that farming has become, the more kind of centralized it's become, the more reliant on external inputs, and obviously the more kind of like a single crop farming system, or like a monocrop, like you mentioned, farming system it became. Is that kind of like a natural progression of farming?
I would say so. And even in the last 50 years, agriculture has become much more specialized. It used to be that livestock were a part of farms. Every farm had livestock almost. And now you start thinking about farms as, cattle farms or corn and bean farms, or you have the orchards, or you have the vegetable producers, and much more specialized over the last 50 years.
Well, can you go over the advantages of actually having livestock as part of kind of like, I guess, the self-containing ecosystem of livestock, crops, and soils in one kind of, I guess, I don't know how to say it, but like a teamwork type of effort in terms of like crop production plus animal production plus soil fertility?
Yeah, absolutely. With livestock incorporation in biodynamics, we have an affinity to the cow, to the bovine species. Not to say that there's no other animals possible by any stretch. Each has their own place. But when you have livestock incorporated into your farm, you have the ability to take what would be a waste product and feed an animal with it. And then that becomes manure, and the manure falls either directly on the ground, or else it's gathered, say, in a lot where you can then pile it up and compost that manure and bedding, and all those things add up to the fertility cycle getting developed on your farm. When the animal consumes it right in place, say a pasture or a crop residue type field, then the manure falls right in the ground. And so there's a really closed, tight fertility cycle happening right there. When you harvest something, hay, and feed it to the cows, and then gather the manure and compost it, then you have another way that you can kind of create this cycle of fertility within your farm. You know, a lot of times hay crops are going to be of a leguminous nature, so they're actually bringing nitrogen into the farm through biological fixing of atmospheric nitrogen from the air. And so you feed that to your cattle, and you're actually then importing nitrogen from the air onto your farm in a way that plants can actually use it, because most of the nitrogen in the air, you know, it's inert, so plants cannot access that nitrogen. There's only a few, namely legumes, that can access that. So you're actually importing that nitrogen into your farm by having these legumes in your farming system and feeding them to an animal, composting it, and that compost then becomes a fertility tool that you can use in your farming system. You know, it's not, when you compost something, you have the nutrients there, but you also develop a lot of humus components to that, and that's going to be this long-term fertility biological influence on your soils. You know, that I always think of compost as being valued about 50% as the nutrients that you're putting on the soil. And then the other 50% probably is going to be the microbes that you're applying to that soil. You're actually you know, that compost has a huge microbial population. And by putting that onto your soil, you're inoculating your soil with these microbes that have the ability to interact with your soil and interact with the plants. And particularly with biodynamic farming, when you have the biodynamic compost preparations in your compost pile, you are using that compost, and then that compost is going to be influencing the soil that it is applied to, and that soil is going to be influencing the plants that are in that soil, and then then you're going to be influencing the livestock or the people that are eating the plants off of that soil. And so ultimately the goal of biodynamic agriculture is to produce food of the highest nutritional quality, and nutritional in a broader sense than, say, what a lot of times people think about. You know, there's you have your nutrients, you have your carbohydrates and your proteins and your vitamins and your minerals and antioxidants. Those are all important parts of food and nutrition. But in biodynamics, we take a step further beyond those and recognize that the plants and the animals are living, and that there's a vitality in those plants and animals that actually is consumed when you eat the food. And it's an important part of maintaining health and vitality, and for the human being, for the livestock as well.
So how does it work, like in terms of the rotational grazing? Like say you have like 1 acre and then you have like a few cattle on it for, I guess, X amount of days, then they move on to another acre and then you kind of plant crops there, and they don't move back until like the crops have obviously been harvested, and then you kind of repeat that cycle. Is that kind of somewhat how it works?
There's a number of ways to do it. You know, we use organic as a base, certified organic as a base requirement for biodynamic certification. And so organic has the requirement that manure cannot be applied within a certain period of time before a food crop is harvested. And so that's also in the biodynamic standard. So one scenario would be that you have your cattle come in and graze on some ground, planted to grass and alfalfa and clovers and other prairie plants. And then they graze it, and then it might be in pasture for 3 or 4 years. You know, it varies based on what the farmer wants to do. Then you might till that ground up and plant it into either vegetables or row crops, something like you know, sunflowers or wheat or corn or beans, and then you would harvest your food crops off of that. That's one way, because a pasture is an excellent way of actually sequestering carbon. where you're taking carbon dioxide out of the air, it's putting it into the roots, and then the organic matter into the soil. And then the livestock graze that, and then the manure is left on the ground, and then it is going to get grazed again at some point, and then more manure gets put on the ground. So pastures are an excellent way at sequestering carbon out of the atmosphere and locking that kind of into the soil. And then that carbon, then that organic matter becomes an important component for the fertility of the crops that are being grown there after that. Another way that that cattle can be used or livestock can be used would be to feed them the crops or feed them the hay off of the ground and then gather the manure, compost that, and then bring that compost back to the field and fertilize the crops with that compost.
And what factors determine like what animal is the best to use for like a specific operation? Like what's the advantage of using cattle versus like goats, for example?
Right. That would come down to the farmer, knowing what those animal qualities bring or what those animals bring to the soil and the fertility. Some of it comes down to nutrients, like what nutrients do the animals have in their manure, and matching that to the needs of the soil. Chickens are going to have a very high nitrogen, high phosphorus, and calcium level in the soil. Cattle, not as much nitrogen, but good phosphorus, not so much calcium. So you're kind of matching your fertility to the soil. Other things are that what qualities does the animal bring to the farm? Cattle are ruminants, much like goats would be a ruminant, and so they take in organic matter, grass and other leaves and things, and actually microbially digest it within themselves. And then that organic matter is changed when it leaves the animal. And so it's going to have also an impact on the microbial communities in the soil, the different manures. So it's there's a lot to think about in terms of what animals are best suited for the land, but mostly comes down to the farmer's decision on what their land needs.
Gotcha. Does Demeter require the farmers to feed the animals just to strict species-specific diet? So in the case of like cattle, for the example we've spoken about, are they required to be like 100%, like legit 100% grass-fed, just fed grass and other forage, or can they be grain-fed as well?
There's going to be different criteria there. The requirement for all of them is that the livestock are fed a biodynamic diet. So the food that the forage or the food that the grain, for instance, that they consume has been raised biodynamically. The standard does allow for a 20% of organic feed if biodynamic is not available. But most of the feed has to come from the farm. That's one of the main criteria for biodynamic livestock on a biodynamic farm. In terms, it's going to come down to what the farmer's goals are. There's not a requirement for grass-fed specifically, but beef cattle are going to be more in line with the grass-fed. Some dairies are going to have a little bit of a grain component. It's not going to be a huge component because you're going to start getting into some imbalances if you feed too much grain. Mm-hmm. And antibiotics are not allowed. So you cannot push the livestock like you would in a conventional dairy where they have antibiotics. So if the animal gets sick from eating too much grain, they have a tool that they can work with to bring the animal back to somewhat of health. But in a biodynamic farm, it's going to have to be respectful of the nature of the animal.
Gotcha. What does Demeter, what's their stance on kind of, beta agonists like steroids being used, other growth promotants like with animals?
Not allowed.
Not allowed at all. Okay. Well, how about with the seed for their crops? Do they have to, I guess, like grow their own seeds, or can they import those? How does that work?
Right. There's the first ideal, the highest ideal would be the farm raises their own seeds. And then, barring that, the requirement is to search for biodynamic seed. Uh, so seed that's been raised under biodynamic conditions to plant. And if that's not available, then a search needs to be made for organic seeds. Um, and only then, if biodynamic and organic seeds are not available, then a farmer is allowed to use non-organic, untreated seeds. Um, and the only and then we do allow hybrids to be used with corn, but otherwise hybrids are not allowed with other cereal grains. They are also allowed with vegetable production, but not. There are certain hybridizing techniques and certain plant genetic techniques that are not allowed. You know, GMO being one of them, and then there's another as well that we don't allow, that organic or conventional doesn't consider.
Is there like a, in order to, I guess, like find these biodynamic seeds, do you guys certify those seed distributors as well? What's a good source a person can use if they're interested in getting those for themselves?
Right now, for certified seed production, we have Territorial Seed is out on the West Coast, and then we have Turtle Tree Seed, which is on the East Coast. Meadowlark Hearth, which is just right here in the center of the country in Nebraska. And one more. If you go to our website, we do have a list of all those seed producers. I think that's the bulk of them, though. Yeah. In our website is Demeter-USA.org.
Gotcha. And I'll include that in the description for listeners too, so they can just kind of click on that really quick. So you mentioned Demeter does not allow monocropping. Can you talk like a little bit more about that?
Well, we're not going to allow, say, like a farm to be planted all to one crop. And we do require that there's biodiversity on the farm. That said, you know, one field within a farm could be planted to one crop. So that's an allowed practice and pretty common. There is a requirement for crop rotation. So you can plant the same crop in the same field for no more than 2 years in a row. In reality, most of the time, the crops are rotated on an annual basis, if not more than annual. But yeah, a farm as a whole is going to be have some botanical and livestock diversity to it. Not going to be just all one crop. And we don't certify field by field either. There's a big difference between organic and biodynamic. We certify only whole farms. And so you look at a contiguous farm organism, and the whole farm has to be certified. You can't certify one field or another field or another field out of that one farm.
Mm. And the U.S. organic certification allows that, right? Where you can kind of select specific fields, and then you can be like conventional in this field, but then an acre away, you could just be like USDA organic certified, correct?
Yep, it's field by field.
Yeah, okay.
Hey everyone, thanks for checking out this podcast. If sourcing high quality food is something you're interested in, but definitely find the subject matter confusing, check out my book on Amazon titled Anti-Factory Farm Shopping Guide. It's a very easy and non-technical read that's beautifully illustrated and comes with a comprehensive video series and other extended learning material. The book, in a very simplified way, breaks down the difference between caged, cage-free, free-range, and pasture-raised meats. It'll cover how to avoid GMOs, source high-quality water, fish, supplements, and many other related topics. Thanks again for checking out the podcast. And when you have a second, please check out Anti-Factory Farm Shopping Guide by Evgeny Trufkin on Amazon.
The USDA organic certification label. What
Could
things?
you?
Yeah, so let's just say you have chicken that's USDA organic certified, being sold as USDA organic certified. And how does the Demeter certification, if I see that on like a poultry label, how does that go above like the USDA organic certification?
Right. That chicken would have been raised then within the context of a biologically diverse farm. It would have been fed biodynamic feed, and with poultry, it's 50% requirement of biodynamic feed and coming from on the farm. Then there's an allowance of some organic feed in there, just to if biodynamic feed's not available within the region. So that's the main difference, is that the feed for that bird is going to be raised biodynamically.
Okay, and I take it it's kind of like the same stark difference between crop production as well, right? Because I'm guessing like crop production, I'm guessing USDA organic certification can still be like monocrop field, but then if it's Demeter certified, it has to come from a farm that has a lot more biodiversity, correct?
Yeah, more biodiversity. There's going to be active use of the biodynamic preparations, which are used in the compost pile. There are also going to be a couple of field sprays that need to be used. And there's going to be a look at also the fertility cycles within the farm. We're going to be looking at how much fertility is actually being brought into the farm, and there's limitations on how much fertility can be brought in. We're going to be looking at the total biodiversity of the farm. And yeah, so there's some differences there in terms of crop rotation and biological diversity. Yeah.
What's Demeter's stance on the use of various, even organic biocides?
We have a little bit more of we have a more strict criteria that are in place than the organic. For instance, there's some broad spectrum insecticides that are allowed with organic use, and Demeter recognizes that their effects are quite wide and not very specific. And so we look at whether or not the use is going to impact the beneficial insect population. And use of these broad spectrum insecticides are actually are required to have an exemption from Demeter to use them. And during the inspection then, and during the review of the farm, we look at whether or not they're being used in a way that limits or eliminates the damage to the beneficial insect population. One strategy would be applying these products at dusk or actually at night, because say like a pyrethrum product will kill honeybees, and it will kill basically anything it touches. So we want to be looking at when they're being applied, and make sure, say, that the honeybees are not present.
And a lot of listeners might not know the importance of kind of the soil food web and how important the insect population is to, I guess, giving like a quality nutrient dense produce. Can you kind of touch on that in terms of like how important that is for the entire ecosystem of the farm, and just
Right.
the quality of the food and the quality of the planet, all that stuff? I mean, it could be applied pretty much everywhere.
So if we could start at an extreme, something that doesn't have a soil food web at all, and that would be hydroponic production, where you have a medium that holds the plant roots, and all of the nutrition is provided by the nutrient solution that runs over those roots in a water form. There's no soil food web there. It's all basically chemical nutrition. It's all a liquid smoothie, I guess you'd call it. And so that's one extreme. And biodynamic would be at the other end of the spectrum, where you're taking soil that has a mineral component to it, has a structure component to it, but then we're working at enhancing not only the nutrient, not only the fertility of the soil in terms of a chemical component, we're looking at it from a biological point of view as well. And that there's a soil food web that's working in that soil that starts with microbial life, bacteria and fungi and yeasts, and then they move up into, say, like amoebas and protozoas, and then those move up into the smaller insects or the earthworms, and then you have, of course, like the birds and the beetles and all these things. So you have this life cycle, and then of course everything dies at some point, and so then it kind of becomes food back for the microbes in the soil, and then you get the whole cycle going over and over again. And that's one of the things that, particularly with biodynamics, we're working to keep that soil food web highly active and vibrant, and that is going to contribute to the nutrition of plants in a much more complex way than a hydroponic situation. So if you think a hydroponic situation, you're only going to have nutrients in your food that was provided in the solution, in the hydroponic nutrient solution. With a biodynamic situation, you're going to have, yes, plant nutrients and fertility in your soil, but you're also going to have a lot of complexity in your fertility in the soil. You're going to have lots of trace minerals, lots of enzymatic activity, lots of biological symbiotic relationships where you have microbes feeding the roots of plants, and in exchange the plant is feeding the microbes sugar from the photosynthesis process. You create this situation where the plant is actually an active participant in the soil. It's not just plants soaking up nutrients. It's actually a plant communicating and feeding a microbe, because the plant wants to exchange a certain fertility, like a phosphorus from the soil. The plant wants phosphorus. The way it gets it is it feeds the microbe. The microbe feeds the phosphorus to the plant. So suddenly you have this experience of looking at your soil and your plants as an actor. The plant is actually requesting fertility from the soil, as opposed to, well, it's in the water, so it just has to suck it up through a straw, whether it wants it or not. So you get that type of relationship with your soil and your plants, and the nutritional quality of those plants when you harvest them and eat them is just a completely different experience from the human being perspective. There's a lot more nutrient density. There's a lot more antioxidants potential. There's vitality that's in the plant that wouldn't exist in a hydroponic type environment, because there's no vitality in the solution that's feeding the plants.
Yeah, and for the listener, and you can kind of correct me if I'm wrong, the US is like the only country that allows hydroponics to be certified as USDA organic, or certified as organic. Other countries, I believe, like they allow the sale of hydroponics, but it can't be actually sold as organic produce.
Yeah, that I don't know for sure, but I've heard that same thing recently. So I think you're on the right track.
Yeah, just in case some people are going to the supermarket and they're buying organic and they're like, this must be grown. In their mind's eye, they probably see the biodynamic kind of farm, you know what I mean, when they see the organic, the USDA organic label. But oftentimes, probably like 70% of those USDA organic foods are basically just factory farms for the most part with the organic inputs, you know, so like monocrops, high density animal production, no real access to like the outside, like the free range label. I don't know if you're familiar with that one. That kind of like pretty much
A little bit.
means almost nothing these days. It's
Yeah.
basically they have like a little concrete patio where they get to roam outside and you have like 40,000 hens in like a single warehouse. So that's like USDA organic these days. So, well, what?
Demeter would not be certifying a hydroponic operation.
Yeah, hopefully not. Well, what's your take on this talk about, you know, the dying off of this insect population, this soil food web, and that's what's basically going to lead to the sixth mass extinction in the world? If you're familiar with that topic at all.
I'm not very familiar with that topic, but it's an interesting concept, because most life on our planet is reliant on the top 6 inches of soil. That's an interesting idea.
Okay. Well, how can you talk about how the certification process actually works to be certified through Demeter?
Sure. We have a number of a couple of possibilities. We work with other organic certifiers, so we can send one inspector that covers the organic side of the inspection as well as the biodynamic, and then we can also, however, certify a farm biodynamic all by itself. And so then the Demeter Association would verify that the organic requirements are met, and we can issue a certification for Demeter for biodynamic only. And it does not qualify a farm for selling as organic because you need to have an accredited certifier by the USDA to make an organic claim in the United States. So those are the two options. You can be certified organic and certified biodynamic, or you can be just certified biodynamic. The process starts out with an application to the Demeter Association. And in that application, we're going to, it's a questionnaire where you fill out and kind of detail all of the things that you're doing on your farm. We call it the biodynamic system plan. And, so it covers things like what's your fertility source on the farm? What are you doing for pest management? Do you have livestock on your farm? Where are your seeds coming from? And if you're transporting your crops, how are you transporting them? How are you packing them? So we basically follow the production from the very first moment on the farm, whether it's a seed in the soil, and then all the way through to the time when the crop leaves the farm, and verify that all those things are meeting the biodynamic standards. And then so we review that, and if we identify that the farm is compliant with the standards on paper, we assign an inspector, and the inspector's task is to go on site and verify that the system plan is actually being implemented as it is reported. And once we get the inspector's report back, we look at all the documentation that we have, and then we make a decision on certification. If the farm meets all the standards, then we issue a certificate, and they're certified biodynamic.
Okay. Do you guys do like any like soil testing for kind of any, I guess, synthetic biocide residue, or do you guys test do like some kind of sample test for the seeds to make sure at least they're not like GMO, genetically modified seeds?
We for seeds, we rely on the seed provider to provide that documentation by and large. For production of crops, we do sometimes have to test the crops to make sure that they're not genetically engineered. And particularly if there's a risk, if somebody's growing corn in an area that has a lot of corn surrounding it, then yeah, we're going to do some testing to make sure that the crop didn't get contaminated with pollen drift. And in terms of soil testing, that's more based on a risk-based assessment. Like if we have cause to believe that something is amiss, then we would do testing. But it's not a routine test that we do for everybody at this point.
Okay. And do you guys have like any breed requirements for the animals? Like, do you lean towards more like heritage breeds or?
No, we don't specify which breeds have to be on the farm. That's discretion left up to the farmer.
I see. Gotcha. Well, how does it work with the labeling? Because I know sometimes I go to a farmer's market and sometimes you just see like people sell like biodynamic honey. Does that mean it's like certified through the Demeter Association, or could anyone just put that like the word biodynamic on any product? And I'm guessing it's not regulated for the most part.
No, it's a certification mark. So the Biodynamic and certified and Demeter are both registered trade certification marks. And so to use those terms in the marketplace on a label, it needs the permission of Demeter and to apply those to a label. And there's a number of different labeling standards that we have. There's Biodynamic, which is kind of 90% of the ingredients are of a biodynamic origin, at least, and then up to 10% of the ingredients could be of an organic nature if they're not available as a biodynamic ingredient. If something's available as a biodynamic ingredient, then it's required to be used. We also, similar to organic, we have a made with labeling category. So you can have like either made with biodynamic grapes for a wine, or you can have a tea that is made with biodynamic, something. And that requires that at least 70% of the ingredients are raised biodynamically. So it's 70 to 90% for that labeling category. There's also a what's called ingredient labeling, which would allow a person to declare an ingredient on the side panel on an ingredient list as something biodynamic as an ingredient, if it does not meet that 70%. So there's a way that you can declare that there's biodynamic ingredients without doing it as like a front label.
Okay, so just to clarify, how come sometimes I see like people do put biodynamic on there, but then don't have the Demeter like logo on label, but then some people have the Demeter logo and not the biodynamic word. Like what's the deal with that?
Well, the logo can be used on the front panel. We call it the Demeter flower, or the Demeter logo. That can be used on the front panel for products that have 90% or more biodynamic ingredients. If you are doing if you have a product with the label only meeting the 70% or 70 to 90%, then the logo can appear on the back panel of an ingredient, but it's not a front panel claim.
Okay.
So that would explain some why you see, and it's not required that logo is used. But it is required for biodynamic. It's going to be certified biodynamic if there's the circle R next to the term biodynamic.
Like right above on the right-hand corner, typically, right?
Okay. Yeah. Recognizing that it's a certification mark and that it's a registered certification mark.
Oh, okay. But if I see biodynamic without that R, that just that has no credibility, or I'm kind of confused about that part.
It would mean that either the label that somehow the R didn't get caught. But if it says certified biodynamic, it would be certified by Demeter in the U.S. If the R is not there, then it would lead me to think that the product is not actually certified.
Okay, I see. Okay, so really quick, kind of breaking it down into application process. Let's say I go to a farmer's market and I see honey, and just a couple of different examples. So I see honey and it says biodynamic and it doesn't have the R. What is that? What comes to mind in your mind's eye?
In that situation, I would suspect that the honey is not actually certified.
Okay, so in that case, I guess the farmer or distributor just kind of put that on there and that's it, most likely.
That's certainly a possibility.
Okay. Well, let's say, and there's no, I guess, no one can penalize them or stuff like that. There are no penalties for doing that, like legally.
Actually, well, there are potentially because it's a certification mark registered with the Patent and Trade Office, and so legally there needs to be a license in place with the Demeter Association to use that.
Okay.
And it's a matter of enforcement then for
Okay.
how to move ahead with the situation.
Well, let's say once again, I see honey, I see biodynamic, and then I see that R. So that means it's kind of like a legitimate, and it's been certified by a third-party certifier, such as the company you work for, correct?
Right, and Demeter is the exclusive certifier of biodynamic in the United States.
Okay. And so now I see biodynamic with the R, and then I see also the flower logo on the front. That's an indication that it's 90% of the ingredients in there are at least biodynamic, and 10%, either it could be 100% biodynamic, but a minimum of 90% is definitely biodynamic, and 10% has to be at least USDA organic certified.
Correct. Yeah.
And then if I see it on the back, that same exact logo with the flower, that's an indication that 70% of the ingredients in there are biodynamic and 30% are at least USDA organic certified, correct?
It'd be 70 to 90% would be
79%.
biodynamic quality. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
That'd be a made with label claim.
Okay. I'm sure that's super confusing for the average consumer. That's why I try to break it down into like very easy ways to understand. Really quick, I forgot to ask you, but so outside of the initial inspection, how many times do you guys go back, I guess, to recertify the farm or re-inspect the farm? Is there like a procedure for that?
Yeah, typically the inspection happens once a year, and there is the possibility of an unannounced inspection.
Okay.
If there's reason to suspect something, then we do have that option to go in and verify things unannounced.
Okay. And is it often that you catch farmers not living up to the standards of your certification?
Very rare.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So I've kind of had a chance to volunteer at a few local biodynamic farms, and I found, like, although some of them aren't certified, like you mentioned before we started doing this show, they've definitely had high levels of integrity already. So, okay, great. I had another question I'm trying to think of. Oh, okay, yeah. What kind of so when you do catch a farmer not living up to the integrity of the claim, what kind of procedure is in place to enforce the rules you guys have, or the standards you guys have, rather?
Yeah, it's a somewhat of a case-by-case basis, but the general process is, if we find something that's not meeting the standards, is we issue a non-compliance, that identifying that this practice is not meeting the standard, and then the farmer has the opportunity to correct the non-compliance, and then life goes on. Generally, we consider the non-compliance process as a way to encourage the farmers to better meet the biodynamic standards. And we see the standards as kind of like the baseline of the good farming practices. And so if the farmer's not meeting them, then we encourage them to meet the practices. And now, I said case by case because, say, we have limitations in terms of how much fertility can be applied to soil. And so, it's so many pounds of nitrogen per acre. If the farmer went a couple pounds over, it would not meet the standard. But it would be a situation where you would encourage them then to kind of, okay, you need to meet the standard. You overdid that application. That's one case. If there's another case where, say, like a prohibited material, like an herbicide that was a prohibited herbicide that wasn't allowed, was applied, that's a different case. In that situation, the farmer's going to lose certification.
Mm-hmm.
They get issued a non-compliance. That ground has to be taken out of production. It's going to have to go through a conversion period again. So there's kind of a scale, I guess, of response that we would have based on the non-compliance. Ultimately, if the non-compliance is issued and it's not corrected, then we move into either suspension or revocation of the certification.
Okay.
And like I said, that's a pretty rare occurrence.
Yeah, I figured.
Really, really good farmers.
Do you guys have like specific standards for how to process animals in the Demeter certification process?
There is a little bit. It's not really that much different from the organic standard.
Okay.
You want to keep the biodynamic animals as biodynamic, and you don't want to be mixing the processing with conventional or even organic.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of just the actual meat products, it's going to be very similar to the organic. In terms of actual meat products, like if you're making something in meats and ingredients, then it gets more specific and more restrictive. The Demeter processing standards are generally geared or generally aimed at gentle processes and not creating fake flavors and just trying to have the food. The vitality in the food and the flavors of the food be the centerpiece of the product.
Gotcha. Well, as a closing statement from your perspective, being in agriculture for so long already, how do you feel the balance between kind of sustainable farming versus like industrial farming is going in America these days?
I'm really encouraged, actually. I've seen a lot of conventional farmers adopting some things that sustainable farmers and organic farmers have been doing for a long time. Aimed at improving soil health, and I think it's high time, and I think there's a lot to learn there. So I think there's a lot of potential for collaboration between the conventional side of agriculture and then the organic, biodynamic, sustainable side of agriculture. I think there's a lot that can be learned. I mean, with organic and biodynamic, we've been working on soil health for decades, and that's going to be really important moving forward, as you were kind of pointing out earlier, with the need to support soil food web.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think ultimately it's going to come down to consumer demand. And I think that's that awareness, the consumer awareness, is becoming much more refined than it's been in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're entering a time where there's potential for a lot of change. I think it's going to be a good change.
Cool. So do you have any closing statements that you would like to include before we close up the episode?
I think if you want to learn more about certification or getting certified, feel free to reach out via the website, and we'll be happy to help. And yeah, I think there's going to be a growing number of biodynamic products on the market, and also more production here coming up. So I think
Cool.
it's good.
Right. Well, thank you, obviously, for doing such a great job. I think biodynamic farming is super cool. So I appreciate what you guys are doing at Demeter. I'll try to include the link to your guys' website in the description section to make it easy for listeners. And thank you again for being on the show.
Hey everyone, thanks for checking out this podcast. If sourcing high quality food is something you're interested in, but definitely find the subject matter confusing, check out my book on Amazon titled Anti-Factory Farm Shopping Guide. It's a very easy and non-technical read that's beautifully illustrated and comes with a comprehensive video series and other extended learning material. The book, in a very simplified way, breaks down the difference between caged, cage-free, free-range, and pasture-raised meats. It'll cover how to avoid GMOs, source high-quality water, fish, supplements, and many other related topics. Thanks again for checking out the podcast, and when you have a second, please check out Anti-Factory Farm Shopping Guide by Evgeny Trufkin on Amazon.